welcome to another session in our series on programming for Android with App Inventor. This video serves as an overview to our unit on getting started. So, before we begin creating apps, there's a couple things we need to do to lay some foundations. First, I want to introduce you to the App Inventor development environment. This is the tool that we'll be using for creating our apps. If you already took our Scratch workshop, you'll find it very familiar. So App Inventor is a little bit different than many programming environments in that it uses a graphical programming model, which means that instead of writing text-based code, like the line here, system.out.println hello App Inventor, you're going to build instructions by assembling a collection of building blocks. It's kind of like putting together a puzzle. You can see I've got two blocks here. A green one, which is telling it to set the label to, and then this purplish one, which is telling it the text value that it wants to put onto that label. We kind of snap those pieces together, and that gives us our instruction. For many people, this makes writing programs dramatically simpler because you don't have to worry about the syntax as much. If I leave out a semicolon or a period, that's really important. But here it's kind of all embedded in the puzzle piece for you, so you don't have to worry about it as much. The development environment not only lets us write our code, but also helps us to execute it as well. The best way to run our code is to have an Android device handy that you can wirelessly connect to the same network as your computer. If this isn't an option for you, we will also talk about how to use an emulator or to connect your device using a USB connection. I also want to talk to you a little bit in this unit about program style. App Inventor loosely follows the object-oriented model of programming, or sometimes it's called object-based programming. This is a relatively simple concept. We represent our data in our interface by creating and manipulating objects. For example, this is a button object. When I add this button to my interface, it gets a name, button 1. And there are other ways we can describe this thing, this noun. What other properties does it have? How would you describe this button? Well, you might say that it's gray, it's square, and it has the text, press me. These are all properties that generally describe the appearance of the object. Properties can also help the program understand how it should behave. Now, all buttons have these properties, these same properties, but they don't all have the same values for all the buttons. If I add a second button, notice that I'm using the same properties, color, shape, and text, but I provide it different values, red, rounded, no, press me. And we get a dramatically different looking button. And again, you can loosely think of of objects as nouns, and the properties are the adjectives we use to help us describe that noun. And that's more or less what we want to think about when we think about object-based programming or object-oriented programming in App Inventor. App Inventor is event-driven. This just means that our objects respond to certain actions. And these actions are usually triggered by the user. This is real easy to understand in the context of our button object. So, what does this button do? Nothing, really. At least not by itself. It just sits there, waiting and waiting. But if you were describing this button in the context of your program, you might start by saying something like, when this button is pressed. And then you'd go on to describe some of the action that that button supports, which could be just about anything, sending an email, canceling an order, going to the next screen. We're going to write code to support these actions, sending an email or whatever. The code is triggered by the event of the user pushing the button. And that's what we mean by event-driven programming. And this is the general model that App Inventor is going to work under. Okay, so that's a high-level overview of some of the conceptual issues in this unit. You should continue to work through some of the other videos in this unit. And when you're finished, you should be able to enter the App Inventor development environment. You should be able to create simple interfaces, manipulate the appearance of the objects on that interface. We should be able to use the block editor to listen for events to make your app interactive. we're going to be able to execute your app, and I talked about 3 different ways we can do that. There's going to be a separate video for each of these methods. So pick the one that's best for you. We're also going to talk about importing and exporting projects from your account. You'll need this when you want to submit your work. Okay, let's get started.